This is really an honor for me to be a first-time presenter at Women in Baseball and a privilege to present on maybe the most beloved woman in all of baseball, and that's Rachel Robinson. So as mentioned, let's see if it works here. Hold on. Come on, slide. There we go. So I'm Jason from SABR Baseball Cards, and I'll just say this presentation will be very much on brand. So when we think of Rachel today, we think of words like legend, activist, icon, and really when we think of her late husband, Jack, we think of the same three words. Now, I think the casual baseball fan presumes that Rachel became all these things because she met and married Jack. In this audience, I think we know it's even more true that Jack became all these things because he met and married Rachel. So what I hope to show in this presentation, focusing on her early life before Jackie, that Rachel was already well on her own path to greatness with or without her famous husband. So we're going to start where it all began for her, and that is on 36th place. This is the Exposition Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, famous for the Coliseum, famous for the USC campus, but at 1588 West 36th Place, that's where Rachel grew up. So 36th place for Rachel was more than just a street name or an address. She returned in 1987 and had this to say. She said, "I carry 36th place in my psyche. It means being secure." So what I hope to cover in this presentation on her early life are the people, the places, the events that took place in her neighborhood that really contributed to that feeling and really helped her become someone who was able to open so many doors and accomplish so many great things. If we start at the very beginning, she was born Rachel Annetta Isum. Annetta was her maternal grandmother, Annetta Jones. And we see her father listed here as Charles Raymond Isum. He went by Ray. And many of you know that Jack would call Rachel Ray, only that was R-A-E. Now, a little bit misleading. We see Ray listed as a mechanic, but in fact, Ray was unable to work for most of Rachel's life with him. We'll get into that soon. And so equally misleading, we see Zellie Nokomis Jones, or Zellie Isum, listed as housewife. Well, Zellie actually had financial responsibility for the family and was always working. So just a little bit about other members of the family. Rachel had a half-brother named Charles from her mom's first marriage, and she had a younger brother named Charles Raymond Jr., who went by Ray. So there was no shortage of Charleses and Rays in the Isum family. All right, let's focus on Ray real quick. Her father was one of Rachel's biggest influences. Ray Isum served in the Army, World War I, and had some bad luck. Those of you that know Armistice Day, right, Veterans Day, we can say November 11th, literally on November 10th, Ray was the victim of a German gassing attack, and from that attack had a chronic cardiac condition that followed him for the rest of his life. He was in poor health really the entire time that Rachel was growing up. He also didn't live to see Rachel's 20th birthday. Now, one ripple effect of Ray's condition, like I mentioned, is that Zellie was always working. Another was that Rachel had really inherited a lot of household responsibilities, but one of them was taking care of her father. So you know that Rachel went on to become a very distinguished nurse, but patient number one was really her father, Ray. And she had this to say: "He needed me so much that I felt like I was his guardian angel. I watched him and watched over him all the time." Now, despite his poor health, Rachel found him to be a tender and very loving father. And out of the three kids in the household, Rachel knew that she was Daddy's favorite. A little bit more about Ray, and this is less central to the Rachel story, but it was just something I couldn't resist sharing for anyone who doesn't know it. So when Ray returned home from World War I, he picked up a copy of The Crisis. That was the official publication of the NAACP. He read about the stories of returning Black soldiers and the racism that they encountered overseas. And you probably know that racism wasn't at the hands of the French or the Germans. It was at the hands of their fellow Americans. So as he read these articles, he was inspired to write his own 4-page typewritten letter to W.E.B. Du Bois. And that 4-page typewritten letter is on the internet, and you can read the whole thing. And anyone familiar with the court martial of Jackie Robinson will see so many parallels that it's just eerie. So Rachel may have married her father. All right, moving on, just one last fact I couldn't resist about Ray. So Ray's parents, Thomas and Dora, were born in California in 1858, and California only became a state in 1850. They came, or their parents, I should say, came for the gold rush. And literally, Ray's family was among the very first Black families to settle in California. Now, this wasn't just 23andMe trivia to Rachel or her father, but it was in fact something that they were very proud of. Rachel said Dad was extremely proud of California being his native state and of being a pioneer. He transmitted that to us, and I still feel that way. So Rachel, we know with Jack, figuratively, they were pioneers in so many ways, but literally, Rachel had pioneer DNA. Let's take a look at Zelly real quick. So here's Zelly with baby Rachel. And Zelly, when I think of her, the word that immediately comes to mind is responsibility, a couple different ways. So number one, I mentioned Zelly had financial responsibility for the family. She ran a catering business and also worked part-time at the main library downtown in the cafeteria. Sometimes Rachel would go with her and earn 50 cents a day. What else, though? Because Zelly had all that responsibility, she handed Rachel, and not at the age of 16, 17, 18, I'm talking about 8, 9, and 10, she handed Rachel almost all of the household responsibilities. Rachel one time said she didn't know if she should feel honored or oppressed that her mom gave her so much to do. What else? Well, Rachel, I would say, was somebody in my reading who always found the silver lining in anything. So she said, my mother wanted a lot from me, but she also gave me a lot. Some of what Zelly gave Rachel was a love of music and the arts, valuing education, but also Zelly really stressed the importance of a young lady to conduct and carry herself very properly. And anyone who's seen Rachel in the last 50 years, really, Rachel has an air of royalty to her. She is baseball royalty, but there's something so regal about her, the way she dresses, the way she speaks, the way she acts. And that definitely was Zelly's influence as well. We'll see a little more on music and the arts. I'll just mention Zelly herself, well-educated, studied at the Tuskegee Institute in their teacher training program and spent 2 years there. Now, get ready. Here's the highlight of the presentation. Don't blink. Look how cute Rachel was as a little girl. I found an old black and white and tried to colorize it. So there she is, little Rachel Isum, in quotes, as she was known in the pages of the California Daily Eagle. She made the paper in her own right as a little girl. I'm focusing right now in this presentation pre-high school. She made the paper for her violin performances, her travels. She spent a summer in Arizona with her grandparents, was on a scouting trip into the Sierras, family vacation in Yosemite. All of these made the pages of the California Daily Eagle, kind of the West Coast equivalent of the Chicago Defender, the largest Black newspaper on the West Coast, based out of LA. Now, Rachel had this to say. She was thankful that her mom gave her a love of music and the arts, but listen to this, encouraging me to appreciate and love music. That was fine, but making me perform at 6 and 7 before I was ready, that was traumatic. Okay, but here comes the silver lining. Still, I was happy and loved and self-confident in many ways. We're going to look now at just a couple of places that Rachel could go by herself. So her mom was rather strict, right? And part of keeping that household together, I think, was really having tight watch over everything, including Rachel. But one of the places Rachel could go on her own was the Bethel AME Church. This church was founded in 1921. Rachel was born in 1922, right? So same age, grew up together, we could say, and it was only a block away. Rachel was on 36th Place. This was on 36th Street, 1 block north. AME, if you don't know, that stands for African Methodist Episcopal, so you can think of it as the Black church. But it was not only the religious center of the Black community, it was actually a social center for everybody. We're going to see more about that when we get to high school with Rachel. But for now, I'm just going to read you something that Rachel said about the Bethel AME Church. She said, the church was central to our social activities. It wasn't something where you needed to have money or any social resources. It was available to you, even as a non-religious type of thing. Now, this is a theme, or these are values that I think followed Rachel throughout her entire life. We're going to see them echoed very strongly in an essay that she writes in high school. But what's the idea here? Everybody belongs, everybody's welcome, religious, non-religious, doesn't matter what you have or who you know. Rachel also was able to walk to the Rose Garden. I show that to the right of the map. And that was a little farther. That was 20, 25 minutes to walk there, sandwiched right in between the LA Coliseum, which is that little oval under it, and the USC campus. Still there today. Beautiful place. She could go on her own. Now, I've got a 1934 highlight, but I'm going to back up and call it a 1933 low light. This is an event that I believe was influential to Rachel in who she became as an activist. So we'll back up to 1933. Rachel was 10 years old. Her father went to meet two of his best friends at a downtown cafe for lunch. And they quickly realized that this cafe had white menus and black menus. And on the black menus, the prices were triple. Now, one of the things that I think was very influential on Rachel was where she grew up. Growing up in Los Angeles in the 1930s was a lot friendlier than many other places for Black families. I think I'm stating the obvious. Now, LA was not a bastion of racial equality, because I'm sharing a story right now of discrimination, but I will say there were things that were happening in LA that were not happening in most of the country. So here we go. These three men, when realizing the discriminatory menus, had some choices. In many parts of the country, I think they would have been forced to just pay the Black prices, or maybe walk away quietly without making a fuss. But that was not Ray, right? And this was 1930s Los Angeles. They felt confident that if they grabbed the Black menus and the white menus, they could take off out the door and let the cafe owner know that they'd be filing discrimination charges. The cafe owner actually sent the police after them, and the police said, "Why would we go after them? They've got a good point." So 1 year later, now we get to the highlight. Rachel was 11. This was the front page of the California Daily Eagle. Judge Leroy Dawson awarded each of these men $300. So a lesson for Rachel from her father: if you encounter discrimination, don't take it, don't walk away from it, but stand up to it, confront it. And you may be thinking to yourself, Jason, would Rachel even know about this if she was 10 or 11 years old? Well, here's the truth. She gave an interview at age 88, and she recounted this episode in much greater detail than I'm sharing it with you. So yes, absolutely. All right. One last quick thing I want to share on Ray. I mentioned poor health, cardiac condition, unable to work, but very involved in civic and community life. He was in a number of groups like the Masons, one called the Foresters, and he tended to roll with some of the movers and shakers in the LA Black community. It's a very fuzzy picture here, but he's shown, he's second from the left in front of the offices of the California Daily Eagle. Second from the right, by the way, is his friend Buell Thomas that was at the cafe with him. We've got writers and editors for the paper, but with VP Harris in the news these days, I will just call out the woman in the middle. That is Charlotta Bass. She was the owner and publisher of the California Daily Eagle when this photo was taken. But in 1952, on the Progressive Party ticket, she was vice presidential nominee. As a Black woman, that was a famous first. So if anyone thought it was Harris with Biden, it was actually Charlotta Bass, Progressive Party. So this was the crowd that Ray was in with, very involved in the community. All right. From here, let's go to part two. Rachel is in high school now. She went to Manual Arts High School, and the motto for Manual Arts was, "It can be done." I think you can think of that as a motto for Rachel's entire life. I'll mention that she had the option to go to Jefferson High School, which was a mostly Black school. Manual Arts was almost entirely white. I bought the senior class yearbook so I could count, and it was over 90% white. There were very few Black students. There were a handful of Japanese American families that sent their kids there, but I think in the postcard, if you look at it, a mostly white school that Rachel attended. Nonetheless, It can be done. You can see it on the map. Again, about a 25-minute walk. She had a young man that liked to walk her to and from school. He probably wished it was an even longer walk. Anyways, I will highlight an activity that took place fall of Rachel's junior year at Manual Arts. There was a huge football game that took place at the Rose Bowl, and it was between the two top junior college teams in the LA area. The Pasadena Junior College Bulldogs were quarterbacked by a young Jackie Robinson, and they were taking on the LA City College Cubs. Now, Rachel was at that game. This was her first encounter with Jackie Robinson. She was at that game, but she was not rooting for Jackie and the Bulldogs. She was rooting for LA City College. I don't know for sure why, but I have speculation here. Their star player, Ball for Clan, led Manual Arts to 2 city titles and lived a block away from the Isum family. So good reason, probably. Now, what did Rachel think of Jack at the time? Was it love at first sight? It was not. In fact, Rachel, when she saw him standing in the backfield with his hands on his hips, looking cocky and arrogant, really found him very off-putting. So spoiler alert, things did change eventually on that front, but this was her first experience with Jack Robinson. His first impression was not a good one on her. Plus, he beat up on her favorite team. All right, let's go to senior year. So there was no most likely to succeed election in the yearbook anyways, but I think Rachel would have done quite well. So let's start with one of the many groups that she was a part of called the Tri-Y Council. It was a girls' service organization at the high school. You can see in the picture, perhaps, bottom of the middle card, a sea of white faces. And that really just reflected the diversity or lack thereof of her school. But nonetheless, this was a school with opportunities for Black students. And so this largely white group elected Rachel as their vice president senior year. Now, something more. Where did they have that election? Believe it or not, at the Bethel AME Church, at the Black church. So when Rachel talks about the church as a place where everyone is welcome and everyone belongs, you really see that example. Rachel also, top of the middle card, was part of the senior forum, and this was where senior leaders at Manual Arts learned to discuss and debate the big issues of the day. So kind of early training in activism for Rachel through the Manual Arts Senior Forum. Again, a sea of white faces. All 3 years Latin. I counted in the yearbook, Rachel was one of 16 students to do Latin all 3 years out of more than 600. Let's head to graduation. Every graduating class at Manual Arts got to give themselves a nickname, and Rachel's summer 1940 graduating class called themselves the Conquistadores. So that means conquerors in Spanish, but let's not think conquering people or towns or any of that. Let's think conquering obstacles, breaking barriers. And Rachel, who, among other things, worked on yearbook staff, got to write 2 essays for the yearbook. The first was on the conquistadores and the Spanish colonial history of California, but here's what she chose to single out. So this is a paragraph from her essay focusing on the Spanish colonial hacienda. She said, "No one was a stranger. All who passed through were friends. At the door, the guest was greeted with the words, 'La casa es suya,' the house is yours." And so I think you hear there a real echo of her feelings about the Bethel AME Church and really her vision for society. Doesn't matter who you are, who you know, or what you have, everybody's welcome. Everybody belongs. She wrote a second essay that was even more important because it was the valedictory essay for the entire yearbook. It was at the very end, after it was only classified advertisements. That's it. So I've printed the whole essay here. I'm just going to read you a piece. Now, bear in mind the school motto, "It can be done." But Rachel says, "All has not been done that can be done. There are still many fields for the conquistadores to conquer. There's the ever-present problem of finding the way to a permanent peace in the world. Also, upon graduation from Manual, we must make a place in the world for ourselves and find a life's work that will help us and others." So you see so many of Rachel's values going into this essay, right? No satisfaction with the status quo. If there are things that can be done that haven't been done, they need to be done. And of course, serving others. So where did Rachel go after this? On a Masonic scholarship that her father helped arrange. She went to study nursing at UCLA. No better way to serve others than to become a nurse. And of course, she made a great career for herself in nursing. But rather than go that direction, I'll just acknowledge early in her freshman year, one of Jack's good friends and longtime teammates, all the way back to Jackie's Pasadena days, Ray Bartlett, had a huge off the court assist. He introduced Jack and Rachel at Kirchhoff Hall on the UCLA campus. That's where the handful of Black students tended to congregate. And from there, I'll say, the rest is history. I've got good stories, but keep in mind, today's talk is called Before Jackie. So with that, I'll just acknowledge I'm in SABR. I don't make stuff up. I have references. And if anybody needs a copy of the slides, I'll drop a link as well. But I also have for you, if you want, a Rachel Robinson Before Jackie commemorative baseball card. So, all right, I'll drop the link in the chat. And if we've got a few minutes for questions, I'm happy to do that.
Thanks, Jason. Does anybody have any questions? Just praise in the chat.
Aw. I should say too, with an audience of SABR women in baseball, if anybody has corrections, that's okay too.
Michael wants to know if Rachel ever played any sports.
So, yeah, good question. I had wondered something of the same. In her senior class yearbook, there was no reference, although I have the summer 40 version. There's also the winter version that has its own yearbook. And if she played any fall sports, they might be in there. So I'm not aware of any. I will say a photograph that I just came across that I love is when Frank Robinson made his debut as baseball's first Black manager. Rachel threw out the honorary first pitch. So I have a photo of her, with her arm back, and her form looks good, her form looks good. So, but yeah, I don't know about that.
Joshua, go ahead.
Hey, first of all, Jason, hey, good to see you. Hi from Eugene, Oregon, a former stomping ground of yours, I know. Okay. And actually, Leslie just said one of the things in the chat that I was about to say, which is so good to focus on Rachel as who she was. I just wanted to, as a history geek, say that it is so good to see the original research, the primary source, the before the person became famous. And I analogize a little bit to Rosa Parks, who of course got famous for a different reason, but there was so much of her life beforehand. I have a friend from college who wrote a book called The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, which talked a lot about everything before she suddenly became famous. Rachel Robinson did not suddenly become famous by marrying Jackie. There was so much more there. And so I just want to say thank you for that presentation. And I guess one question I have is how you did a quick list of sources at the end, but how easy or hard was it to find a lot of this information from way back?
Fantastic. Well, wonderful comment first off, but I'll give a shout out to SABR, right? In that adding Black newspapers to our SABR subscription certainly helped a lot. California Daily Eagle was wonderful, right? I list LA Times, Pasadena Post. Those are more things about Jackie and him playing sports. All the early Rachel stuff came from the California Daily Eagle. So if you know where to look, she's easy to find, right? Isum isn't a super common name. So you'll get some you click on some and it'll be somebody else or whatever. But for the most part, not too bad. But I'll say the score, right? I think for the Rachel Robinson researchers out there, there may not have been a lot I showed that was new, but I think her essays from the yearbook, finding so much on her in her yearbook, I think that was something because that's not a yearbook that's digitized yet. I may actually try to do that just to help future researchers, but that was something I actually had to go on eBay and pay a lot of money, right? Literally. So this is funny. The day my talk got accepted, I'm like, okay, I better buy the yearbook. So I wanted to make sure I had something new that nobody already knew about her. So yeah.
Let me see. There are some questions popping up. Marlene wants to know, did you share your cards with the family or the museum?
So not yet. It is funny because I'm a believer that sometimes a good way to share stories and keep legacies alive is through baseball cards. And of course, a lot of the figures that need this don't have real cards, right? So it comes down, like Michelle Obama says, don't complain, do something. It comes down, I make my own in many cases. So there are folks out there where I've made cards of their family members and they really appreciate them. I'm always a little scared if I say Jackie Robinson Museum, I made some cool cards of Rachel. Do you want them? That, I might get a restraining order or a cease and desist. You know what I mean? Because there's a business aspect to all this. So no, they're not aware, I suppose, if somehow they watch this talk on YouTube, they'll either call me to ask for some or they'll call me to stop doing it.
What drew you to Rachel's story in the first place, Jason?
Well, my gosh, right? I mean, it's like every birthday she has, it's like, it's such a miracle, right? I mean, she just celebrated her 102nd birthday. And I felt like Mark Armour calls her the first lady of integration, right? I felt like for someone who's had such an incredible life, at least my own knowledge of her always came down to maybe the same 5 or 6 anecdotes or something like that. And so I was inspired to learn. And it was really the call for presentations for this conference where I thought, this is a chance to take my curiosity of wanting to learn more about Rachel and actually do something with it, right? If the talk is accepted. So, I grew up a Dodger fan and, I think we're all Jackie Robinson fans anyway, but, I sort of had a special love for Jackie and Rachel, but realized I didn't really have any expertise.
Great, thank you. I'll take one more question. Maureen just put in the chat. Are you going to write a book via the cards, perhaps?
Well, shoot, I told y'all everything I know. No, I'm kidding. I've got more stuff I had to cut, So I'm not really a book writer, but I might write like a little blog post or something like that. Yeah.
I'm sure if you guys have any more questions, Jason can get to them in the chat. But thank you so much.